I see a big problem of people being overeducated and underexperienced. So I think that your master's degree or graduate degree needs to be very much on par with your experience to make yourself the best job candidate.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours, where we break down the key trends shaping higher ed and what those trends mean for students and families. Today I sat down with the CEO and founder of the College Investor, Rob Farrington. We had a really wide-ranging conversation about student loans, the changing federal policies through the Big Beautiful Bill, and just some of the ways that students and families can start thinking about saving for college earlier. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode, so let's jump right in. Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and I'm excited to be joined here today by Rob Farrington, who's the CEO and founder of the College Investor. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, excited for this conversation. So one of the things I want to kick off this discussion with is around paying for college. And from your perspective and from your experience, what do most students and families fail to take advantage of most when it comes to paying for college?
I think there's two parts to this one. So, first, I don't think enough families start early enough to understand even the pricing and how it works and what they could be expected to pay. I think a lot of families go in blind thinking, well, I'm going to get all this aid, or, the prices of colleges aren't necessarily the actual price out of pocket, because we hear that, but we don't actually know what that looks like in practice. And so you get these families that are starting in their senior year. It's the fall of senior year, and they're starting to apply, and they just don't even know what they're going to pay. And I think that is the first kind of failure. Then it comes to, what do they fail to take advantage of when it comes to paying? I think scholarships are a big one, but I also think it comes down to, like, knowing what scholarships and what options are even available to them, whether that's through companies or employers or parents, which I think is a huge one, like especially for parents that work at large companies or in a union or something like that. There's money there for you. Part two is what's available from your state and how all the state programs work. Because that's confusing, but there's a lot of state aid for students, especially if they want to navigate their choices to a state college or community college. But again, you have to do a little research. You have to know what's available and know how to apply or take advantage. Or is there a second application for your state? Or what does that look like, right?
Yeah, and I think even just kind of piggybacking off of that, like what option is a best fit for you, because that's going to vary if you're, doing something in the trades or vocational school or a boot camp versus a 2-year college versus a 4-year college versus, maybe doing, joining the military or doing some other post-secondary option. I think it's going to really, really vary from option to option.
Sure. And I also think best fit comes down to finances a lot. I think a lot of people think of best fit as academics or the programs or the career trajectory. But the truth is higher education in the United States costs money, and you have to know what you can afford, have transparent conversations between a parent and a student, and be able to navigate what the financial fit of a potential college education looks like, whichever path you choose.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really, really sound advice. The good news is I think there are tools to help provide some clarity earlier on in the process. Net price calculator through the federal government. I know I sat down with the founder of My Intuition, which is another financial aid calculator that makes it really simple. So the tools do exist for families and for students to get some of that insight earlier on, and that's always one of my biggest recommendations for students and families who I'm helping, is just to take advantage of those earlier on, just to have that conversation about affordability.
I love it because when I was going to college, I feel like a lot of these tools didn't exist, or they did, but the data wasn't as good. And I feel like one of the benefits of the internet age we live in is that we have more data now than we've ever had before. And so you could really understand how your financial aid offer stacks up. You could really understand how, like, whatever career, like, you can find the salaries of every job in America today with like a simple Google search. And like, we didn't have that when I went to college. And so I really think it's important for families to not only understand the net price of college, but especially for families that are borrowing, which is a large percentage of families going to college, you need to understand what loan repayment looks like and how that fits into the salary in the career field you're going to. And I also say, don't look at like the mid career earnings or the late career earnings. Look at what the starting salary is, because you're going to be paying back that student loan from 22 to 32. You're not paying it back in mid career or late career. And so, what does an entry level salary look like in whatever field you're going into? And then, where do you want to live too? Because you got to pay for housing, you got to pay for food, you got to pay for transportation, you got to live a life, and your student loan is going to be on top of that. So, what does that look like after you graduate college and whatever that happens to be?
Yeah, I love that holistic approach of thinking about it. That's one very important piece of the puzzle, but just one piece. And there's, a whole bundle of life decisions that you're going to be making at this time.
And yet, we make them at 17 or 18 make these
Yeah.
massive life decisions, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even for, thinking about like where you're going to live, in some places that might require you're going to need transportation. It's going to be a car. In some places that might be, a subway or a bus or, some sort of mass transportation. So it's really, there's a lot of different, things that go into this financial decision.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, how are some of the other ways? I know you mentioned the technology and data bringing about a lot of like useful tools for students. What are some of the other ways that you've seen, students paying for college change over time?
Sadly, I think we're just seeing the amount of student loan debt growing, right? So it's not that necessarily they've changed the way they're paying, but the amount of loans families are taking out for college is more. We're not necessarily seeing a ton more students in college. We are seeing a little bit more students in college, but not massively. But the amount of debt, especially on the parent borrowing side, has magnified. We're issuing about 100,000 more loans these days than we were in the mid 2000s. But the average balance of the loan we're giving out to families these days is double, especially on the Parent Plus loan side. And so it really kind of highlights the bigger issue with the system is that college costs have risen, right? And parents are supplementing these rising college costs with more student loan debt to pay the bill. And so I still view paying for college as a giant pie, and there's a ton of slices. And all the slices are scholarships, grants, institutional aid, parents' current income, students' current income, savings, 529 plans. And then you have the loan slices. And sadly, I think those loan slices have been growing quite a bit over the last 10 to 20 years, right?
Yeah, I know that one of the big changes with the recent legislation to the student loan program are caps on Parent Plus loans. I'm curious what your take is on how this impacts students and families going forward.
There's definitely pros and cons. There's winners and losers to that one. I think from a public policy perspective, the caps are probably a good thing. I think Parent Plus loan borrowing is one of the biggest, fastest ballooning sectors. Parents were borrowing a lot. I don't think a lot of people understood the dynamics of Parent Plus loans, that it's the parent's loan, it's not the student's loan. On someone that helps a lot of families, I see more problems and more scenarios involving Parent Plus loans blowing up in families' faces than any other type of student loan that we encounter over at the College Investor. They were a real problem area. And so I think from a public policy perspective, it's a good thing. I think from an individual's perspective on how you pay for college, it definitely adds a layer of complication into the equation, right? So for those that don't know, Parent Plus loan borrowing now is capped at $20,000 a year, $65,000 in aggregate. Some simple math there. that doesn't get you an even amount over 4 years, first off. And then, you're layering it into some challenging situations because the undergraduate loan limit for a freshman, for example, is 5,500, and then 20,000 is the Parent Plus loan. You're at a max borrowing capacity now of $25,000 a year. That should be plenty, but a lot of colleges are definitely charging more than that. In aggregate, it allows an undergraduate family, a student and a parent, to still borrow 90,000 plus dollars together, which personally, I think that is plenty. The data says that the average value of a bachelor's degree in America using a net present value calculation rarely exceeds $100,000 today for most programs. And so when you're borrowing $90,000, you're already basically pegging yourself at the average value of a bachelor's degree. So again, pros and cons. Public policy is probably going to be a win. Individual situations are going to add to a challenge when it comes to it.
Yeah, and it sounds like this for the next few years might be a particular challenge as everyone's sort of adjusting to the new normal. Seems like just on the college side where I'm guessing a lot of schools, baked in, that they would be able that some families would be able to cover the gaps in financial aid with Parent Plus loans. That's obviously changing, might change college behavior slightly for students. As you mentioned, it adds a bit of complexity where, to fill those gaps, you, I guess, can either consider a more affordable option. You're going to be shopping for loans on the private market. On the, I guess, focusing on the students and family side, what are some of the other considerations? If I'm like a parent or a current high school senior who is going to be, dealing with this, for part of my college career.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to the massive changes to the repayment system too. So one of the other big changes is these new Parent Plus loan caps now exist, but they've also changed that Parent Plus loans have no pathway to loan forgiveness through public service loan forgiveness or long-term income-driven repayment plan loan forgiveness. In fact, they don't even have access to income-driven repayment plans anymore. Parent Plus loans can only be repaid under the new standard repayment plan starting in 2026. And that can change the math, right? The Department of Education, through various court filings, has been very clear that Parent Plus loans are going to parents who already have jobs. They're not using it for their own education to better their own careers, and they should know exactly their ability to repay. And so these new changes are really dialing in on that. So as families have to realize that there's going to be payments due. You can do the math on those payments, and there's no pathway to public service loan forgiveness, which I know a lot of families actually counted on because parents were maybe teachers, right? And they were still working and they'd send their kid to college, take out a Parent Plus loan, and they'd continue their career and get that loan forgiven. And that pathway is being eliminated. So as families are looking at college, they really, really, really need to assess the costs more than ever before. What that looks like. What does repayment on these loans look like? How can I afford it? I agree with you. I think we're going to see an uptick in private student loan borrowing. I think inevitably colleges, I don't think I don't think they can seriously do much more on the price. They might not rise as fast, but let's be honest, prices aren't coming down. A lot of these colleges have saddled themselves with a lot of fixed costs. They've borrowed, they've taken out debt to finance huge building infrastructure projects, staffing, salaries, whatnot. There's a little bit to cut there, but in aggregate, maybe we'll see a flat line on prices. I don't see them coming down. I do see colleges with bigger endowments offering more generous financial aid packages. I don't think this has to do with borrowing limits, though. I think this has to do with the higher tax burdens that they're going to face with the new college endowment tax on earnings, right? So, like colleges, if you spend all your endowment earnings, guess what? You don't have to pay taxes on that money. And I think some of these schools, we're already seeing the headlines come out right now. I saw another Ivy League is offering free tuition to college students making under a certain amount. I see that trend escalating for colleges that can spend their unrestricted endowment funds to avoid potential tax liability.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Just the on the kind of college behavior side, and I've seen a lot of the same, headlines and policies from some very well endowed resource schools. But I think it's important to note that these are some of the wealthiest, like $1 billion endowment types of institutions. Not all colleges are going to be behaving in the same way, and higher ed as like it's not like it's a monolith that's acting a more way. A small regional private institution is going to be behaving very much differently than a Ivy League institution with a multi-billion-dollar endowment. So it'll be interesting just to see how that changes as well. But yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's hard to imagine a world where prices are actually coming down. Maybe that slows. Um, and there is just a little bit more attention on that cost because of the restrictions that students are going to be facing and families are going to be facing as far as how they can pay and what funds are available to the government. Especially that's going to be the case for grad school. And I know that was also. Can you tell everyone a little bit about some of the changes to the graduate student loan program? Because I think that seems like it will be an even bigger deal for
The
schools.
the graduate school changes are going to see massive. It's a massive disruption, and I think from the borrowing side, let's talk about what happened. So the new student loan changes for graduate borrowing is the elimination of the plus grad or grad plus program, and previously the grad plus program allowed you to borrow up to the full cost of attendance for graduate school, whatever that cost of attendance was. Fast forward to starting July 1st, 2026, we are separating out borrowing limits for graduate school and professional school. Graduate school borrowers will be able to borrow $20,500 per year, up to a cap of $100,000 lifetime. Professional school is going to be $50,000 a year, up to a cap of $200,000 lifetime. The more important thing on the graduate school side, though, is a lot of graduate programs aren't 4 to 5 years. A lot of them are 2 year programs, MBAs, for example, Master in Education, things like that. So your real cap is actually 40,000 or $41,000 a year. It's not that $100,000 cap because you're only doing it for 2 years. That is going to have a massive, massive impact to graduate school programs, especially on the master's degree side. I don't see very many changes to professional schools. I don't think we're going to see massive changes to healthcare, law, dental school, things like that. I think we're going to see a shift from some programs are going to try to redesignate themselves as professional schools, especially in like the nursing and any of those other ones that are kind of in a gray area. They're going to say that we actually are a professional school because we lead to licensure, but you still leave this gap of education, any of the liberal arts, master's degrees, MBAs, for example. I mean, there's very few MBA programs that cost less than $20,000 a year. And so those ones are going to see some real impacts to who can pay for these because now these caps on borrowing are there. I think two things are going to happen, though. I think we might see a rash of program closures in the coming years, especially on these liberal arts master's degrees. People aren't going to be able to pay for them. And I think we're going to see an explosion of private lending for master's degrees that people still do want to pay for. And I think the MBA is going to be one of those because I think people also get the benefit of tuition reimbursement and things. And so a private loan will be a stopgap until their employer recoups some of the costs for them. But it's going to be a big change for graduate school borrowing in general. And I do worry about professions where the state mandates you get a master's degree to continue. For example, education, for example, social work. You're basically bound by either your licensing board or your state rules to get a master's degree. But now your pathways to pay for it. And along with that, the ability, if you take private loans, there's no ability to get loan forgiveness. So a lot of these were benefiting from public service loan forgiveness as well. And I know the data point, I know this was really pushed hard by a few think tank groups where the data shows that 40% of master's degrees have been delivering a negative ROI over a 10-year period of time. And a lot of those are those liberal arts master's degrees. And so I know this was a direct push towards who's paying for it, how that forgiveness is taking place. Are these degrees worth it? Should we be giving them on potentially taxpayer dollars? But again, from a public policy perspective versus an individual's perspective, they're two very different things, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you breaking it into those two buckets just because I think that's I think an important distinction just as we're having these conversations. I think another interesting aspect of the graduate lending is for many institutions, graduate programs have also been a way to bring in tuition revenue.
Yeah.
So that can just for universities that have extensive graduate enrollments that could trickle down and impact to the undergraduate aspect of this as well, which I think is really will be really interesting just to see if there are changes and consolidation and how programs are being offered, what types of formats, just because there's going to be a lot less funding available, and I think probably for the students going to a private lending option that will make them think a little bit more about whether this is a program that is going to be worth it or not, because as you said, there's not going to be the potential for the loan forgiveness. There's, obviously, I think there's just something different optically about a loan that's offered through the federal government where you don't need, it's not like driven by your credit score, and it doesn't have to be underwritten by a private financial institution.
You nailed it. I think when you're talking about the universities funding, these universities need revenue. And we were talking about the undergraduate loan limits earlier. But let's talk about a professor, right? If you are a professor, typically you're teaching a chunk of graduate school classes and a few undergraduate classes, right? And so the universities were relying on maybe revenue from the grad programs to help pay for those costs, with knowing they're going to get less revenue on the undergraduate side. And so I think the hard part is they're going to see a lot less revenue in these graduate programs. I think there's going to be a consolidation in them. I think it's going to be a trying few years for those programs. But I also hope on the individual level, it really does help. People need to think twice. Is my program worth it? Do I need this? Who's paying for it? Because I'm a big fan of you shouldn't pay for a master's degree if you don't need to. Who can pay for it? Can my employer pay for it? Can I get options to do it? If it's like the politics of the office, well, the office should be paying for it, right? So
Yeah, how if I'm like maybe a recent graduate who's thinking about going to graduate school, maybe I'm a little bit nervous about the job market and just wanting to make sure I'm competitive as possible. How would you recommend a student kind of go through that decision making process?
I would generally lean to no. My biggest talking to like 24 to 28-year olds, I see a big problem of people being overeducated and underexperienced. So I think that your master's degree or graduate degree needs to be very much on par with your experience to make yourself the best job candidate. And going right out of undergrad into grad school typically puts you in this over educated, underemployed, underexperienced bucket where you don't have the experience to match that degree. And so it doesn't really help you, and you spent a lot of money on it. I highly recommend people go out, work for a few years, and then come back to those. And this is why even the states that require it, for example, education, they say go teach for 5 years, and it's usually by your fifth year you need to do it. Like, get the experience so that you can par your experience with the degree. Not only will it help you, but like it'll be so much more relevant for you in your career and your experience from like an actual education side. You can actually understand what people are talking about in your programs to make it better for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really sound advice. And I think for, a lot of students, they'll realize that there's not that many careers where it's like absolutely essential, where it's not just like a nice to have, it's a necessity. And if you're thinking about something like law is a good example, like you do, for better or for worse, you're going to need to get your JD for certain, certain states, teaching social work, you're going to need to get a degree. Um,
And even social work, though, like a lot of them, you don't need the master's until you're trying to be the licensed person. You can start with the bachelor's of social work, get some experience, see if you like the field, see if you like the work. Because the other thing that I've learned, law being another one, is there's a huge burnout rate. There's a huge disconnect in certain fields where it's like you go into it and you work for 5 years and you're like, I can't do this work. It is mentally draining, physical, whatever it happens to be, and I'd hate to see you get a degree and then get saddle yourself in a lot more debt. And then do you stick around for 10 more years to get it forgiven, even though like you emotionally and mentally can't do the work? Like it leads to bad outcomes. And so like even then for fields like social work, start with your bachelor's of social work, go get some experience. Yes, you can't do the one-on-one work potentially, but you could see the field, you can get the experience and decide if you want to continue forward.
yeah, I think that's really great advice. I think yeah, my other thought on that is just being really thoughtful about the types of schools you're looking at. And I know sometimes you know, there's certain private institutions that have very very high price tags. Sometimes that is worthwhile, sometimes not. And for most students, your in-state public institutions are gonna offer as residents just in-state tuition, and that can be a very very valuable thing for students. And sometimes there's even like other credentialing opportunities. I think about my middle brother. After he got his bachelor's degree, got an associate's in computer science and web development, and that wound up being a really great fit for him. It was really affordable, and got him skills for that job. He didn't need to go get another bachelor's degree. He didn't need to go get like a master's degree. And that was a good fit for what his goals were. So I think
And
there's
I
it's a
mean,
definitely.
and I was like, you know the stats. Like what? Only 30% of graduates, like for a bachelor's degree, go into the field they got their bachelor's degree in. Like it's a long life. Like a lot of people don't do the same thing. Some people also start in one thing and they pivot and they change and they, like you didn't start as an entrepreneur. Like you didn't start writing a small business. Neither did I. Right? Like everyone. I also kind of view life in kind of like 5 year increments. You got your high school years, you got your college years, you got your first 5 years after college. Get a little experience, see the world, understand how you are as a person now. Because I promise you, when you graduate college, you weren't the same person when you went into college. And 5 years after college, you're not the same person you were when you graduated college. And like life changes, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I think we're and I think that's the tough thing about the way school works is it is very linear and very structured, and you go from this to this and you're sort of climbing up a ladder, but life is not like a ladder at all.
Nope.
Which is wonderful and gives you a lot of opportunities. But I think it's requires a big shift in mindset for students who are just used to you graduate from high school and then you go to college, and then for I think for many students graduate school or something very structured just seems like a safer bet. And I think sometimes it can be wind up being riskier just because if you're getting doing a degree that's not really you haven't really tested whether you're interested in that, and you're taking on a bunch of debt that can really impact and limit the decisions that you other decisions you can make as far as moving and buying a house, getting married, having a family, starting your own business. And I think, having the optionality can be a very, very good thing.
Absolutely. You nailed it.
Um, I guess as we start to wrap up, Rob, a couple of questions that I ask everyone that are a little bit more tactical. What's and I guess to be more specific, for maybe we can do two answers to this question. Tool or resource you find you're recommending to students the most? I guess for bucket one would be high school students, and then the other would be current college students.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of actually go hand in hand. So bucket one for high school students, I love the college scorecard. Go in there. If you have your list of colleges you want to apply to, go put all of them in the scorecard. And if you're not familiar, it gives you a ton of statistics. It's created by the Department of Education, but it has things like loan repayment rates, average loan balance, like how many people are in default on their loans, graduation rates. Like it gives you a ton of data that might help you inform your college selection choices. I like to pair that these days with the free op data set. So FREOPP, they're a think tank. They have a data set of all like 30,000 undergraduate programs. So not just the college, but they take it down a level to the program, and they tell you basically the 10-year outcome, how much student loan debt is created by the program, and then what the average salary is and what it is. So if you want to go be political science at University of California, San Diego, which is where I went, it'll tell you exactly what you can expect to earn, what your student loan debt is, whatnot, and it gives you very clear statistics. So it almost takes it to the next level. Then you can
Yeah.
kind of go ahead.
Oh no, I love the scorecard and the free op. Yeah, that's a great tool. It's fun to play around with.
Yep. And then if you're going to graduate school, I always say the free op graduate data set as well. But then I also want you to pair that with your earnings and really do a math calculation. We can argue the merits of higher education all day. Education is a great thing for our society. Getting a bachelor's degree is amazing. But as you start getting into more and more specialized graduate degrees, if you're borrowing money for this, it really does become a much higher level financial decision than it does a holistic educational decision. So, like, please make sure you're diving into the finances on what graduate school looks like.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And I know when I like going through doing our, when my wife and I do our budget, it's can be sometimes an unpleasant experience just to see, oh, this is what we're spending money on. You're like, oh my gosh, last month we spent, this on this. But that's kind of how you keep yourself on track and accountable. And it's a big, yeah, just it's a very big, complex buying decision. Higher ed,
I
probably
mean,
the only thing that's bigger is a house, buying a house. So you want to do your due diligence and put a lot of thought into that purchase.
you nailed it. I mean, higher education is usually the second or third largest financial decision that most families make. Housing being number one, car, and higher education, right? Look at how much work goes into buying a house and getting a mortgage or even getting a car loan. Like, you got to look at your income and your debt and all this other stuff. But it's like, are we doing the same thing when it comes to borrowing student loans? Sadly, I don't think enough people are, especially when you think of the collateral of student loans. And I don't think people really think hard about the collateral of student loans, but you get a mortgage, the collateral is the house. And you don't pay your mortgage, they take your house. Same thing with the car, right? You don't pay your car note, they take your car. The collateral on student loans, when you think about it, is your future earnings. Because if you don't pay your student loans, what are they taking? What are they garnishing? They're garnishing your wages. They're taking your income. And so when you're looking at whether to get a student loan or not get a student loan, you really need to have that future earnings focus in mind. Again, I think education is a fantastic thing and everyone should focus on education, but there are 1,000 ways to get higher education today in America, and not all of them cost a fortune. You can go to a community college that's a free in a third of states. You can go work for an employer that will provide it for you. I want to say there's like 100 employers these days or more that will offer you a free online college through like ASU and different things, right? And when you're done with your bachelor's degree, 1 year after you get your bachelor's degree, nobody asks you where you got your bachelor's degree. They don't care. So, like, please, 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 because we don't need the keeping up with the Joneses mentality for college. Because your neighbor went to this fancy college with a private, like a fancy dorm and spent all this money doesn't mean you have to. It is not the only path to get higher education.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes seems like a bit of a controversial take, but I don't. I think there are a lot of legitimate, concerns around cost. We talked about today, but I also think there are ways to get an affordable degree. And yeah, whether I think those are two great options you brought up, a 2-year college, and so many states have articulation agreements where you can transfer to 4-year colleges. I was just listening to the an interview with the chancellor of UC Berkeley talking about how that's something that they're really bullish on. Continuing to build their community college, 2-year college pipeline at UC Berkeley, which is like one of the very best public institutions in the world. And then if you work at Starbucks as a barista, you can get a degree through Arizona State, which is again like a really reputable institution, lots of different majors, and you're gonna come out with like I guess like essentially like a free degree.
Yeah. I also am super bullish on how do we minimize the time in college? Because there's two aspects of it, right? There is the cost of the college, but let's just say you only need to do 3 years. So I'm very bullish on dual enrollment, AP, all these things. Like, can you knock out like the English 101, math 101, whatever it is, so that when you get to college, you're really starting to focus a lot more on your major requirements, things like that. So maybe you're done in 3 years. Easiest way to save 25% on the cost is if you knock a whole year off, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I got my degree in 3.5 years. Technically, I had some AP credits, and that was great, and just got to save a bunch of money. I was an RA in school that paid for my room and board. So yeah, I think also very bullish on AP and dual enrollment, which is really exploding in
Yeah.
the U.S. Just as an option. And I think with that one important thing to take a look at is seeing how the credits will transfer over at your school, just because some schools make that a little bit more challenging. Some schools are really great. So devil's always in the details.
I find that very frustrating. I actually had someone reach out in tears because they got into their dream college, and their college said, "We no longer accept more than like 12 dual enrollment credits," or something outrageously low, and this person had like 60. They had taken like every AP course in high school. And I also find that frustrating because it's like, I get it. Like, you have some majors, and I just think sometimes these colleges think better of themselves than they do of actually helping their students. Like, they're trying to give an education that they believe is like the greatest, but it's like, look, man, it's math, like algebra 20, and if they fail the next level at your institution, you're going to make them retake it or make them do another one. But like, why are we making kids do the same thing twice? It gets very frustrating, you know?
Yeah, I think there's definitely not the disconnect between K through 12 and college that I think creates like some more inefficiencies. And I think a lot of like public institutions will be quite good at
Yeah.
transferring over credits. So that's like generally, not always, but generally a good bet. But I did run into that. I had some other credits that my college would not accept, because I think that at that time the rule was they were college classes technically taken on a high school campus, and that was the distinction, that they, were not able to accept a handful of classes. So I knew that going in, and there were other colleges that did, and everyone, your process is going to be a little bit different, but definitely the details matter a lot, and you'd want to, that's something, if you have a bunch of dual enrollment or AP, IB credits, making sure you understand like what that looks like earlier on in the process. And the same thing with transferring from a 2-year college to 4-year college, making sure you understand how your credits transfer over, just because conversely, awesome to graduate in like 3.5 years, less awesome if you're going to have to graduate in like 5 years, and spend
Because you're
extra.
retaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so Rob, as we wrap up, where's where are the best places for people to find you and your content? We can jump
Absolutely.
into that.
So you can find us at thecollegeinvestor.com. If you're listening to a podcast, which you likely are because you're listening to this show, you can find our podcast, The College Investor Audio Show, on your favorite platform. And then we're also on all the video channels, The College Investor. Find us there if you like to watch.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the time. This has been a really great conversation. I think students and families are going to get a lot out of it. So really appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.